here in New York to participate in How the World Changed, which is a symposium of 9/11, 10 years after. We're here with a lot of speakers like Webster Tarpley and Barbara Honegger and Wayne Madsen and Ray McGovern, and it's been kind of a treat to actually meet all these people face to face that I have known only in their virtual counterpart all these years. So that was an important part of the trip. And we wanted to get together and basically hold a truth movement event on the anniversary of 9/11, and basically get to meet the people who are part of this whole movement and sort of reinforce each other that we do care about the truth and we care about where the nation is going. And we may disagree on some of the fine points about what happened on 9/11 10 years ago, but we are united on those points that we do agree on, which really comes down to, we know the government lied to us about 9/11 in order to start a war, just as the government lied to us about the torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, or what blew up the USS Maine, or whether or not Pearl Harbor was really a surprise or not. And over time we've come to understand that all of those were war-starting lies, and it's just 9/11 is just the latest in a long series of these deceptions. And we need to come together and unite on that point, and we need to stop arguing with each other over fine details and decide what are we going to do about a government that lies us into wars of conquest. Because every single day that we argue amongst ourselves and don't do anything, more young Americans are going to die in combat in these far-flung regions of the world, sitting over oil or water or gold or molybdenum or whatever else it is the American corporate empire feels it needs. And I remember back during the Vietnam era, in the height of COINTELPRO, where the FBI would have informants and infiltrators in the anti-war movement to basically put out crazy ideas, cause trouble, try and trick people into fighting each other over trivialities in order to prevent us from actually doing anything that would stop the Vietnam War. Some of the tricks were pretty dirty, like a staged riot at Disneyland that discredited the whole peace movement. All sorts of dirty tricks like that. And as a result, the war continued on, and 60,000 Americans were killed in it. And of course, the war itself resulted in America's first defeat in quite a long time of history. We know that these wars that we're currently in are very unpopular. We understand they are started with lies and deceptions. And if we're not willing to stand up to the government and say we will not support wars started with lies, then we're basically condemning our young people to bloody, violent deaths. And that's not something that's really all that easy to live with.
What are some of the Vietnam-type tactics against the current anti-war movement that you see?
It's a repeat of what they did before. They send in infiltrators to encourage the dissidents or the protest groups to commit acts that the media can use to discredit them or attack them. A good example would be, again, from the staged riot at Disneyland. You know, the photographers got photos of the infiltrators beating up on Mickey Mouse, the little costume character Mickey Mouse, and the headline said, "These so-called peaceniks resort to violence," and things like that. A lot of phony letters sent out on forged letterhead to try and cause all kinds of problems. A lot of infiltration of the Black Panther movement, and a lot of people even today believe the Black Panthers are this evil group, but they actually started out concerned about breakfast for the ghetto children and local control of the school curriculum, and it wasn't until the FBI infiltrated them and radicalized them that they started getting violent. One of the dirtiest tricks the FBI ever pulled against the Black Panthers was called the Black Panther Coloring Book. And this was a coloring book that was distributed by the FBI itself, filled with all of these racist, hateful images of blacks killing whites, of police officers portrayed as pigs, and it was blamed by the media on the Black Panthers. And the goal there, the agenda, was to destroy communication between the blacks and the whites, to get the whites to stop listening to the black movement at a time when the black civil rights leaders were pointing out correctly that the Vietnam draft was putting black kids out on the front lines catching bullets, and the white kids were in the rear echelon safe areas. And it was a legitimate grievance, but the Nixon White House did not want anybody paying attention to the civil rights movement or giving them any sympathy. And so COINTELPRO had an ongoing mission to disrupt the civil rights movement and to undermine the civil rights leaders. ultimately leading, of course, to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah, Muhammad Ali said no Viet Cong ever called me nigga.
Yes, that was absolutely right.
I thought that was the most beautiful things.
Then, as now, we were being told that this was a war to preserve our way of life, to bring democracy to these other countries. And we know now, looking back, since the end of World War II, there have been over 30 U.S. military interventions into other countries, always on the pretext of bringing these countries democracy. But democracy never results. We're always imposing these dictators, these tyrants. 1953, the U.S. CIA overthrows the democratically elected government of Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran and installs the Shah of Iran, who brings about the secret police, the Savak, and ultimately leads to the revolution of 1979, which brings about the Ayatollahs. And this is a repeating pattern. The U.S. will go into a country, impose a dictator who oppresses their people for the benefit of American corporations. There's a revolution, and the country where the revolution has happened hates the United States of America, and our government says, oh, they only hate us for our freedoms. Really, they're bad now because they don't like us anymore. But we did it over and over again. We did it with Pinochet in Chile. We did it with Batista in Cuba. We did it with the Shah of Iran. We did it with Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines. It's an ongoing process. They tried to have a coup in Iran 2 years ago. It didn't work out. Ecuador. Now they're basically going to succeed here in Libya. The Egyptian revolution may go into a phase 2 because all of a sudden, when it was the Egyptian people rioting against Mubarak, that's democracy. But now that they're rioting against Israel, oh, we can't have that. And Obama's over there telling the new Egyptian government, you slap those people back into obedience. And now, of course, we have this situation with, they're going to go into Syria and even possibly Turkey. And basically, they're overthrowing governments that are not subservient to the United States and, more to the point, to Israel.
What do you think about the 9/11 truth movement versus the anti-war movement? And do you think, which do you think is more important? And do you think one is used to kind of co-opt the other, or?
I would like to think that they are mutually supportive, because the anti-war movement wants to end the conflict and the deaths and the murder, and the 9/11 truth movement is basically saying these wars don't have a justification and a foundation. And so when we make the public aware that the war is itself illegitimate, this is going to build more support for the anti-war movement. Because now the anti-war activists can go out there and say, well, look, we're opposed to this war not only because we're killing a lot of people, including our own, but we understand there is no foundation for the war. We don't have the moral law on our side, to paraphrase Sun Tzu. The war doesn't serve a purpose that helps this nation. We're killing people who did absolutely nothing to us at all.
Do you think, like, there's certain aspects of the 9/11 truth movement that act kind of kooky to be, like, for example, I know in the Vietnam era, kind of the focus for the media was always the crazy drugged out acid hippies, when there was plenty, especially in 65, 66, plenty of short-haired college students, articulate speakers who were very much against the Vietnam War.
Well, in any protest movement, the whacked out kooks are usually the ones planted by the government, the undercover informants. And I came into close contact with this myself, because right after that Disneyland riot, my best friend at the time had been part of one of the organizing groups. And after it was all over and the whole thing, he basically broke cover, admitted he was an FBI informant, and he tried to recruit me. That's why I said, look, this is what we're doing. We're doing it for the flag and apple pie, and, you know, to just keep those. And that was the last time I ever talked to the guy. And that was really the eye-opener for me that, yeah, the government does play these kind of dirty tricks. And by the way, for those of you watching the video, if you're in college now, this continues to this day. The FBI, even the CIA, they have agents on your campus disguised as students. So that smelly kid with the dynamite trying to talk you into blowing up a building, that's the FBI stooge. Please see that some harm comes to him. And yeah, it's all dirty tricks. And it's like I said in my presentation, all power really is the government being able to commit acts that the ordinary people are taught they may not do. We're taught we shouldn't steal. The government is constantly taking stuff that does not belong to it. We're taught not to kill. The government is constantly murdering, whether they call it execution, termination with extreme prejudice, assassination, war. We're always taught thou shalt not bear false witness, and we see the government constantly lying in order to manipulate public opinion into support of whatever the agenda is. Government reserves to itself the right to lie, cheat, steal, and kill with impunity, but we, the serfs and the slaves, are bound by chains of belief to not engage in such practices, which would, tend to make rulership a little bit more difficult for the powers that be.
Could you talk a little about maybe the balance where people go too far into conspiracy world, and like it's a psychological tool that they start listening to a certain a radio show or something, and they just don't know where to stop.
Well, that's a very, very complex issue. There are a lot of people who are looking into conspiracies as a way of finding more of a sense of adventure about their own lives, and they can get caught up in the whole situation, but at the same time it's also an avoidance, because you can look at the obvious signs that the government has done something really horribly wrong, and continuing to work and dig and just get down to the tiny minutiae is a way of avoiding the ultimate question: what do you do about it? And this, of course, was again the point of my talk yesterday. After 10 years, we're never going to agree on what hit the Pentagon. Let's stop wasting our time doing that, because obviously that's what the government wants us to do, spend the rest of our lives arguing about plane, no plane, directed energy weapons, scalar this, blah, 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 blah. We all agree the government lied to us to start a war. What are we going to do about it? And if you fail to do anything about it out of fear, then you are condemning thousands, maybe millions, of your fellow Americans to very bloody and violent deaths in the far-flung corners of the world.
It's hard for me thinking, like, how do you prevent the infighting, but at the same time you have to kind of call someone out for what they are when they're exposed.
If I think somebody is a deliberate agent provocateur, I will call them out. And other than that, I tend to avoid these arguments. The only reason I spent the last few weeks in the trenches, as it were, over that no plane issue at the Pentagon is I'm convinced that is a planted piece of disinformation to ridicule and abuse and discredit the 9/11 truth movement at a key time. And I think at the point where the government feels that the entire 9/11 truth movement has been gulled into this no-plane nonsense, all of a sudden a piece of film will emerge after 10 years that unequivocally shows the 757 plowing into the Pentagon. And I think the reason they haven't done it yet is because those of us who are convinced that this is all a lot of nonsense would be made instant media heroes, and they don't want to take that chance. So that issue is probably never going to be resolved one way or the other. And my point is, it doesn't really matter anymore. Let's unite around what we do agree on. We got lied into a war. Now we have to face that question. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to just sit on our butt and let more young American men and young American women get blown to bloody bits because we don't have the courage to stand up to a government that lied us into a war and say, to hell with you, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to pay your bills. You don't represent the will of the people. When government lies to the people, it's no longer a legitimate government. The Constitution does not authorize the government to lie to the people. The 10th Amendment forbids them from assuming that right. And so when a government lies to the people, it's acting illegally, it's acting unconstitutionally, it's no longer the legitimate government. And more than that, it is simply a sign of disrespect. When the government lies to the people, it is a sign they have no respect for the people at all. We're not persons, we're not humans, we are things, we are assets, we are human capital to be shuffled around and herded and directed against a certain agenda.